Let's write out some code to satisfy situation number 1 and number 2. To get started, we're going to refactor some of the code at the top of this file first. I'm going to define a new function that I'm going to call mount. There's nothing special about the name mount whatsoever. It is just an arbitrarily decided upon name. The goal of the mount function is to take in a reference to an HTML element. So we're going to receive some argument right here that we'll refer to as L. So again, this is an HTML element. Then inside the mount function, we're going to do everything required to start up our app, and then eventually produce some HTML and render it or display it inside of that element right there. So to make that happen inside of our case, I'm going to take everything from products down to about line 10 right there. I'm going to cut all that and paste it inside of mount. Then, rather than rendering our application into this element that we're trying to find on the fly, we're going to instead render our application into that element right there. So I'll do l.innerHTML, like so. So now we've got a function that we can call in either situation number 1 or number 2. Now, just so you know, the approach of using this mount function right here can be used with many other frameworks as well. For example, if you're making use of, say, React, rather than doing this last line right here, we could do something like, say, React DOM.render, and then maybe some kind of app, and we want to render it into that element that is being provided. So the idea of some mount function like this is going to ultimately work with many different frameworks we might decide to use. Now, how are we going to use this with situation number 1 and situation number 2? Well, in situation number 2, there's something I want to point out here. Remember, we don't have any guarantee that some element exists on the screen or inside of our HTML page that we can definitely render into. In addition, we probably do not want to try to immediately render the app. If we are showing our container, it's really up to the container to decide how, when, and where our products application should be displayed on the screen. The container might only want to display our list of products if the user goes to some very particular URL, or if they click on some button. So in context, or situation number 2, rather than trying to call the mount function immediately, or anything like that, we are going to instead export the mount function. By exporting the mount function, now our container can import the mount function and make use of it whenever it wants to. So now it's up to the container to decide when to show our product's application on the screen. Now we do have to go over to the container and make sure we now import the mount function, eventually call it, but before we do, let's go ahead and take care of context or situation number 1, situation in which we are running this application in isolation. The first thing we have to do in this case is decide whether or not we are in isolation. For that, there are 2 checks that we're going to implement. The first check we're going to make is ensure that we are running this project in development mode. So for that, we're going to add in an if statement, and we're going to say if process env node underscore env is equal to development. This is an environment variable that gets set automatically by Webpack. That environment variable gets set because inside of our webpack config.js file, we had added in a mode of development. So because we put in that option right there, Webpack is going to automatically replace this with development. So if we are running our application in development mode, well, we're going to go into this if statement. So then once we are inside of here, we need to do one further check. Remember, we can be in situation number 2 and still be in development mode. So in other words, if we are running our products application through our container in development mode, we're still going to satisfy this check. So now we need a second check inside of here to decide whether or not we are running products in isolation. This check is a little bit harder to implement because, well, how do you decide whether or not you're running products by itself? One very easy way we can do this is just put in some kind of very unique HTML element into the products HTML document. And that's why we put in this div right here with an ID of dev-products. The thought here is that only our products HTML file is going to have a div with that ID. So if there's some element inside of our HTML document with that ID right there, we are just going to assume that we are running products in isolation. In other words, we are assuming this HTML file has that element, and we are assuming that our public HTML file does not. Now, that's not a very great assumption, because of course, our container, or the engineering team in charge of the container, they could very easily decide that they want to have some kind of element inside of here with an ID of dev-products. So it's not a great assumption, but I'm sure you can probably think of some way to make a very unique identifier that is probably not going to show up inside the container app anytime soon. So you could change this to from, say, dev-products to dev-products dev-only or something like that. Something to just guarantee that we're only going to have an element like this inside of our products HTML file and probably never inside of our container. Okay, so I'm going to stick with dev-products. So inside this if statement, I'm going to do a L document query selector for pound dev-products. And I'll say if we found an element, then let's call our mount function and provide that element, try to render our app into it. So I'm going to put inside of here, or right above, just a comment and say, assuming our container doesn't have an element with ID dev products. So that's, again, a really big assumption, but honestly, well, we're probably not going to have an ID like that inside of our container. So if we get into this if statement right here, that means we are probably running in isolation. So just running products by itself, and we're not executing products through our container app. Okay, so we are ready to test out products by itself in isolation and make sure that our application still appears on the screen. So let's try that out really quickly. At my browser, I'll go to localhost 8081, and yep, looks like our app still appears. So now we just need to make a quick change to our container app. We need to make sure that the container now tries to import this mount function and eventually calls that mount function with wherever the container wants to show the product list on the screen. So let's take care of that refactor in the next video.